Welcome to my podcast, Scientist Free from Religion. This podcast has as proposal, as main idea to talk about a scientific topic, but also talk about religion. Different from the common assumption in which science and religion should be separated, here on this podcast we recognize formally that science and religion are not disconnected. Sadly, religion can be a very big threat to science. So on this podcast, the proposal is to talk about it freely, so without fear, without the illusion that they are separate topics. So we are going to cover a possible topic. Most of them will be focused on the connection between religion and science, especially to defend science. That's our goal. Our goal here is to defend science from religion and to help to make science, to spread scientific thinking, especially to defend it against religion.
Have you ever paused to truly consider what counts as science? Like when you picture it, is it just lab coats, maybe some beakers, things you can measure precisely?
Right, things you can replicate perfectly in a controlled lab setting.
Exactly. Or is it possible that science is actually, well, something much broader?
Yeah.
Maybe more dynamic and perhaps even surprisingly spiritual?
That's a really provocative question to start with.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, the definition of science itself. And we're spurred on by two, frankly, fascinating articles from the Scientists Free from Religion blog.
Okay. That platform is interesting in itself, right? It specifically aims to look at where science and, well, non-religious or even spiritual ideas meet or sometimes clash.
Precisely. And these two articles, one by Nathan Ariano and another by Jorge Guerra-Pierres, who holds a Ph.D., they offer these contrasting but also really complementary views. They push us to challenge our own assumptions about where the boundaries of science actually lie.
Yeah, and starting with articles from that particular blog immediately signals we're not just talking about dry dictionary definitions. We're getting into the frameworks we use to understand reality and maybe where those frameworks get fuzzy or even contested.
Absolutely. So our mission today is really to unpack these different perspectives. We want to explore how fields like, say, psychology are already pushing those boundaries, blurring lines we might have thought were pretty solid.
And maybe look at why holding on to a really narrow definition of science might, perhaps inadvertently, end up excluding huge areas of legitimate knowledge and discovery.
Exactly. So get ready for hopefully some aha moments that might just reframe how you think about knowledge itself. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're kicking things off with Nathan Arellano's piece, Psychology, a bridge between science and spirituality. Arellano starts with this really compelling idea. He argues that psychology has, maybe always, occupied this unique position.
Like a meeting ground.
Yeah, a kind of meeting ground between the empirical world, the stuff science usually deals with, and that more introspective personal realm we often call spirituality. He thinks psychology is sort of uniquely equipped to reinterpret some old spiritual ideas scientifically.
And that's really where psychology stands out from the hard sciences. Physics, chemistry, they typically demand strictly objective, measurable evidence, stuff you can replicate again and again.
Right. Cold, hard facts.
But psychology, it actually dares to explore subjective human experiences. Feelings, beliefs, moments of meaning, things that for a long time were just labeled spiritual, or maybe even dismissed as unquantifiable, not real science.
So it's this unique position that lets it act as a bridge between these two worlds that seem so opposite.
Exactly. It really challenges that common idea that science and spirituality have to be enemies. Ariano is suggesting a way that can actually coexist, maybe even, help each other out.
Okay, so if psychology is the bridge, we need to be clear on what it's connecting. Ariano lays out definitions for both sides. For science, he says it's a method of understanding reality through observable, measurable evidence.
Right. Objectivity, experiments, proof. That's the traditional model.
And historically, if you couldn't measure it, weigh it, replicate it in the lab.
Yeah, people were skeptical, weren't they? It got dismissed as just anecdotal or maybe unprovable.
Definitely. And then on the other side, you have spirituality. Ariano defines that as concerning the non-material aspects of life.
Things like meaning, purpose, connection.
Yeah, exactly. Our sense of meaning, purpose, feeling connected to something bigger than ourselves, experiences of awe, inner peace, that sort of thing. And these spiritual insights, they often come from really personal experience, right? Or maybe introspection or wisdom traditions passed down.
And they inherently resist the kind of proof science usually demands. You can't exactly put inner peace in a test tube. Precisely. And this difference in their, let's say, language and methods created this huge historical gap. You had spiritual traditions talking about energy, transcendence, enlightenment for millennia.
While scientists were asking for data, for quantifiable results, for experiments they could repeat.
Right. So for a long time, many of these profound inner experiences just got written off as unscientific because they didn't fit the standard lab model.
Okay, so that's the gap, and psychology steps into it. Ariano points out that as a social science, psychology absolutely uses rigorous scientific methods. Experiments, surveys, statistics, peer review.
All the standard tools. It's not just making things up.
No, but its focus is unique. The human mind, human behavior, including all those slippery subjective feelings, beliefs, inner states that other sciences tend to shy away from.
And the key insight from Arellano here, the real core of his argument, is how modern psychology has increasingly started to validate concepts and practices that spiritual traditions taught anecdotally for ages.
It's not proving God exists or anything like that.
No, not at all. It's more about systematically studying the measurable effects and the tangible benefits linked to these spiritual practices or inner states. Like what actually happens in the brain or to our stress levels when someone meditates.
Ah, okay. So it's building this evidence-based bridge using scientific tools to look at things that came from spiritual wisdom.
Exactly. It shows how these two seemingly different ways of knowing can actually inform and enrich each other. It's quite a powerful convergence when you think about it.
Okay, let's make this bridge idea more concrete. Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. Arellano brings up some great ones. The first, and probably the most famous example, is mindfulness meditation.
Right. Everyone's sort of mindfulness now.
Exactly. But it's been practiced for thousands of years in Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism. It was seen as a path to inner peace, less suffering, self-awareness.
But in the West, scientists mostly just dismissed it, right, as mystical or just unproven woo-woo.
Pretty much, for a long time. But then psychology stepped in. Researchers got genuinely curious about these ancient claims. Could meditation actually reduce suffering? Could it improve well-being? So they started studying it rigorously.
But often under the secular name mindfulness, not necessarily tied to religion.
Precisely. They took the practice, sometimes stripped away the specific religious dogma, and just examined its effects using objective scientific methods. And the results have been, well, pretty astounding.
What kind of results are we talking about?
Tangible, measurable benefits. Study after study now shows mindfulness can significantly reduce stress, anxiety, depression. Sometimes it's shown to be as effective as standard treatments like antidepressants or cognitive behavioral therapy for certain conditions.
Really? As effective as medication?
For some anxiety and mood disorders, yes.
Right.
There was a huge meta-analysis looking at data from over 12,000 people, cited in 2023, which found mindfulness-based therapy worked just as well as those standard treatments.
Oh.
And that same analysis also showed consistent improvements in sleep quality. So we're not just talking about vague feelings of calm, we're talking about measurable health outcomes.
That journey of mindfulness is really striking. You think about someone like Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, he was pivotal.
Back in the 70s, he introduced mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, into Western medicine. He specifically made it secular, right? Focusing just on the observable effects for patients with chronic stress or pain.
Exactly. He translated it in a way. And look where it is now. You mentioned everyone's heard of it. Well, the data backs that up. By 2022, something like 1 in 6 U.S. adults practice meditation.
1 in 6? That's huge.
It is. It went from this, niche, maybe slightly weird idea to being promoted by hospitals, used in therapy, adopted by corporations, even taught in schools.
So psychology took this spiritual tool, tested it rigorously, translated its benefits into scientific language.
Without losing its core effectiveness. And in doing so, it gave credibility to an ancient practice, and it genuinely enriched science with new, validated methods for improving mental health.
It's like Ariano says, the East already knew about meditation's power.
And now Western science is confirming it with hard data, and this success really opened the door for psychologists to explore other concepts that maybe originated in spiritual or philosophical traditions.
Which brings us to another really fascinating example, Carl Jung and his ideas about archetypes.
Ah, Jung, definitely someone not afraid to wade into spiritual waters.
He observed these striking similarities in myths, in religious symbols, across totally different cultures, right? Figures like the Great Mother, the hero, the wise old man.
The shadowy villain, yeah. These patterns seem to pop up everywhere, regardless of geography or direct contact between cultures. Jung thought it was more than just coincidence or story spreading.
So he proposed the collective unconscious. What exactly was that?
It's a pretty radical idea. Essentially, he suggested there's a universal inherited layer of the mind shared by all humans, filled with these primordial images or patterns, the archetypes.
Inherited, like biologically.
That was the implication.
Yeah.
He described it as a vast spiritual heritage resurrected in each individual brain structure. Like the psychic residue of our ancestors' accumulated experiences. Pretty profound stuff.
And controversial, I imagine. Especially back then.
Oh, definitely. It sounded very mystical, especially when he talked about the archetype of the self, which he linked to the idea of the God within, representing wholeness and a kind of natural human religiosity, but framed psychologically.
So how does this fit the bridge idea? It sounds hard to test in a lab.
It was and is hard to test directly, especially the collective unconscious part. But we have to remember, Jung was a trained clinician, a researcher. He wasn't just making things up randomly. He enriched psychology immensely by drawing on mythology, Eastern philosophy, even alchemy, things most scientists wouldn't touch.
He broadened the scope of psychology.
Massively. And while not all of his specific ideas are accepted as hard science today, modern psychology has found some indirect support or interesting parallels.
Like what?
Well, think about evolutionary psychology. They talk about universal human tendencies, like innate fears of snakes or the dark. You could see those reflecting ancient, shared, archetypal survival patterns.
Ah, okay. Like echoes of the collective unconscious, maybe?
Perhaps. Or look at Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey. He drew heavily on Jung and showed how that specific narrative structure appears in myths and stories across cultures and throughout history. It suggests a shared human template for understanding transformation and struggle.
So even if the core concept is hard to prove, the insights it generated are still valuable.
Exactly. It shows that these deep questions of the soul about meaning, universal symbols, the human condition, can be explored within a psychological framework, even if they touch on spiritual themes. Jung definitely helped make concepts like symbolism and myth respectable topics within psychology.
Okay, let's fast forward to a more contemporary example. Something being studied right now. The emotion of awe.
Ah, yes. Awe. That feeling.
That goosebump feeling. Staring at the stars, seeing the Grand Canyon, maybe witnessing an incredible act of kindness.
It feels profound, doesn't it?
It really does. And traditionally, it's always been linked to spiritual or transcendent feelings. People often say they felt the presence of something greater.
But how do you measure that? It seems so subjective, so fleeting.
Well, psychologists are actually doing it now. They're treating awe as a measurable human experience, looking at its triggers, its physiological effects, its psychological outcome.
Then what are they finding?
Really fascinating stuff that, again, seems to echo what spiritual traditions have said for ages. When people experience awe, they consistently report feeling smaller, like their individual self sort of recedes.
The small self effect.
Exactly. Your ego quiets down, and you feel more connected to others, to the world, like you're part of something much bigger.
That sounds very spiritual. It does, doesn't it? The Greater Good Science Center even classifies awe as a self-transcendent experience. They put it in the same category as deep meditation or flow states, those times when your sense of self dissolves.
So scientific language is now describing experiences very similar to enlightenment or communion.
Pretty much. It's remarkable seeing terms like transcendence pop up in scientific papers studying awe.
And are there practical benefits? Does feeling awe actually do anything for us?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really compelling. Experiencing awe doesn't just feel good, it measurably changes our behavior in positive ways.
How so?
Studies show people induced to feel awe become more kind, more helpful, more generous, like literally more likely to help a stranger or donate to charity compared to people just feeling happy.
Wow. So feeling small makes you more pro-social.
It seems so. Awe also boosts mood, reduces stress, increases curiosity, and even makes people less materialistic, which makes sense, right? Hard to worry about your new phone when you're contemplating the vastness of the cosmos.
So wait, spending a few moments feeling awe, this sort of quasi-spiritual emotion, can measurably make us kinder, more humble, less stressed.
Exactly. Fostering traits like compassion and humility, which pretty much every major spiritual tradition has championed for centuries.
It's like empirical validation for ancient wisdom.
Precisely. And look at positive psychology, that whole branch focused on human flourishing. They explicitly include things like gratitude, forgiveness, and transcendence as key virtues for well-being. Psychology is now providing data that supports what spiritual teachers have been saying all along.
It really suggests that wisdom, that deep understanding of how to live well, isn't just in science or spirituality, but maybe where they meet.
That seems to be Arello's core point, that maybe the deepest wisdom lies right there at that intersection.
Hey there, thanks for being around. We are going to make a small break. I'm going to share with you my books. I have several books. So far, all my books about religion, atheism, which have been published a lot, they are in Portuguese, which is my main focus. But if you are interested, you can still buy my books to help me to support my work. I have several books. For example, one book that I'd like to recommend now is AI by Sci-Fi. AI by Sci-Fi is a book that talks about artificial intelligence, which is everyone is talking about artificial intelligence with ChatGPT, all this amazing stuff that they can do. They can talk, they can create video, they can create podcasts. This podcast, for example, there are several episodes that was recorded using artificial intelligence, which is amazing how I can do that. I can even interact as you could see in several episodes. So I would like to invite you to buy my book AI by Sci-Fi. It's available on Google Books, Google Play. It's also available on Amazon. So you can buy my book. If you are interested in something a little bit more complex, a little bit more technical, I do have as well technical book. For example, I have one book about computational thinking, in which I talk about Kasparov. It's a technical book. Greg Kasparov was the first guy to be beaten by a computer. He has a very nice book about that, how artificial intelligence overturned the difference between human and artificial intelligence. So please buy my book and offer me all the support. You can find all of them on Amazon. Hopefully in the future I'm going to write also about religion, atheism, and science. But I do have a podcast. I do have a blog called the Scientist Free from Religion. The same name of the podcast. And you can find several already publications about several topics in which talk about science, religion, and atheism. So hope you enjoyed the show. So let's come back to the show.
So to wrap up Arello's view, his message is basically that we don't have to pick a side, skeptic or believer, evidence or intuition.
Right. He's suggesting human experience is this big spectrum. It ranges from the measurable stuff, the neurons and hormones, all the way to our deepest hopes and dreams and sense of meaning.
And we should embrace the whole spectrum.
Yeah. He argues that ancient spiritual practices often have real, measurable benefits, and looking at them scientifically doesn't diminish them. It can actually clarify and enrich our understanding.
You can describe the brain waves during meditation.
Without losing the profound feeling of peace it brings. You can analyze the structure of a myth using Jungian ideas.
And still feel its power as a story about the human condition. You can measure the physiological effects of awe.
And still feel it as a connection to something vast and transcendent. Wisdom, in this view, really emerges where science and spirituality talk to each other.
Okay, that's a really compelling picture of psychology as this bridge. But exploring that raises an even bigger question, doesn't it?
Which is?
What exactly is science? Who gets to draw the lines? And that brings us perfectly to our second article.
Right, the rebuttal.
Exactly.
Say?
Dr. Jorge Guerra-Pires takes a much more critical look at the very definition of science itself, offering a strong pushback against some of those narrower views.
This sounds like it's going to get interesting.
It does. So Pires' article is titled, very directly, What Counts as Science? A Rebuttal to Reductionist Definitions. And what's brilliant is he starts by quoting the exact definition of science Arellano used earlier.
The one about observable, measurable evidence, objectivity, proof.
That's one. Science, a method of understanding reality through observable, measurable evidence, and so on. But Pires doesn't just present it, he immediately challenges it. forcefully.
How does he challenge it?
He calls it a classical Newtonian definition. He argues it basically comes from the success of physics in the 17th century, and while useful then, it's just not sufficient anymore.
Newtonian, like Isaac Newton, focusing on mechanics, quantifiable laws.
Precisely. And Piers argues that sticking rigidly to that specific model of science today risks excluding vast swaths of legitimate scientific endeavor.
Like psychology, which we just discussed.
Exactly, but also history, theoretical physics, even parts of philosophy. Fields that don't always fit neatly into that measure and replicate in a lab box. He calls this definition reductive.
Meaning it oversimplifies science, narrows it down too much.
Yeah, it loses the nuance, the complexity of how knowledge is actually built across different fields. And Piers stresses this isn't just some academic quibble over words. How we define science fundamentally shapes what we accept as valid knowledge.
It determines what gets funded, what gets taught, what we consider truth.
Exactly. It has huge implications. So Piers then makes a really important historical point. He says, quite simply, science didn't begin with Newton.
Okay. That seems obvious when you say it, but what's the implication?
The implication is that our view of science needs to be much broader historically. Piers points to ancient civilizations, Aristotle in Greece doing detailed biology, Alhazen in the Islamic Golden Age, pioneering experimental optics.
So systematic inquiry existed long before Newton?
Absolutely. People were using reason, observation, empirical data, rigorous debate to understand the world for millennia before the 17th century. Newton refined the method, especially with math and replication, but he didn't invent science.
So limiting science to what Newton did is ahistorical.
Yes, Piers calls it ahistorical, and even anti-intellectual. It ignores this vast, rich history of human inquiry just because it didn't look exactly like 17th century physics.
Okay, that makes sense. And it connects directly to how fields like psychology or history get dismissed as soft sciences, right?
Exactly, because they don't perfectly fit that Newtonian mold. How does Piers defend them?
Well, he argues forcefully for their scientific validity. Take psychology. Yes, humans are complex and variable, which makes perfect replication tricky. But does that make it unscientific?
Piers says no.
He says absolutely not. Psychology uses sophisticated statistics, controlled experiments, meta-analyses to find robust patterns despite that variability. It has rigorous methods.
And what about historical sciences, like paleontology or evolutionary biology? You can't rerun the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Precisely. These fields reconstruct the past using available evidence, fossils, genetics, artifacts. They rely on inference, corroboration, dating techniques. It's a different kind of scientific method suited to non-repeatable events, but it's still systematic and evidence-based.
So Piers is saying that rejecting these fields just because they don't fit the lab coat stereotype is wrong.
Yeah, he thinks it's a fundamentally flawed and limiting view of science. It throws out vast areas of knowledge simply because they don't use a test tube.
Okay. He also brings up string theory as a modern challenge to these definitions.
String theory. Elegant math potentially explains everything. But we can't test it experimentally, right? Not yet, anyway.
Exactly. The energies needed are way beyond our current tech.
So does that mean it's not science? According to someone like Karl Popper, who emphasized falsifiability.
That's the big question Popper's criterion raises.
Yeah.
If you can't even imagine an experiment to disprove it, is it science?
What does Piers argue?
He argues for a more nuanced view. He says science isn't only about what's testable right now, it's also about developing these incredibly rigorous theoretical frameworks, exploring their internal consistency, their mathematical elegance, their potential to explain things.
Even if the test might be decades or centuries away. Exactly. It's about building models that might become testable. It acknowledges the crucial role of theoretical development and intellectual rigor, not just immediate empirical verification. It's a more dynamic view of scientific progress.
So science uses different tools, different approaches. Piers also mentions deductive versus inductive reasoning. Can you break that down quickly?
Sure. It's about different ways of thinking scientifically. Deductive reasoning starts with general principles or laws and derives specific, logically necessary conclusions. Think theoretical physics, deriving equations from first principles. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true.
Like logic proofs.
Kind of, yeah. Inductive reasoning is the opposite. It starts with specific observations or data points and builds up to broader generalizations or theories. Think biologists observing many different species to develop evolutionary theory, or statisticians analyzing survey data.
So specific observations lead to general ideas.
Right. And Peyer's point is that both are essential to science. Physics uses deduction, biology often uses induction, psychology uses statistical induction. Defining science only through one lens, he says, is intellectually impoverished. It ignores the diversity of scientific thought.
Okay. And then there's philosophy, often seen as totally separate from science. Where does Peyer's place philosophy?
He argues it's inseparable from science, which might sound odd at first.
Yeah, philosophy isn't doing experiments.
No, but the philosophy of science deals with the fundamental questions. What counts as evidence? What is causation? How does inference work? What makes a good explanation? These are the logical and conceptual foundations scientists rely on, often without even realizing it.
Like the underlying rules of the game.
Exactly. Peyer's uses Einstein's thought experiments as an example. Those weren't lab experiments. They were brilliant philosophical explorations of concepts that revolutionized physics. Without philosophy providing that underlying structure, that epistemological foundation, Peyer's argues, science loses its footing.
Okay, that's a really broad view of science. Now, Peyer's gets into a critique he calls apologetics by definition. He uses John Lennox, the Christian apologist and mathematician, as a case study.
Ah, Lennox. Yes, he often argues that belief in a rational creator was essential for the rise of science in the 17th century, citing Newton, Kepler, etc.
Right, and Peyer's takes issue with this. This seems central to the Scientists Free from Religion blog's focus.
He takes strong issue. Peyer's argues this isn't just a neutral historical observation. He calls it a theological narrative disguised as epistemology, using the history and definition of science to make a religious point.
How so?
Peyer says Lennox defines science very narrowly, drawing a tight circle around that specific 17th century European Christian context. He essentially says, look, real science started here, and it needed Christianity.
And in doing so, he downplays everything that came before.
Exactly. Babylonian astronomy, Islamic science, Greek philosophy, Peyer's argues Lennox dismisses or minimizes these contributions because they don't fit the narrative. He calls it historical revisionism with an agenda.
So it's a selective reading of history to make a point about religion's necessity for science.
Precisely. Peyer's identifies the underlying logical fallacy. Lennox implies that because some early scientists were Christian, and perhaps some Christian ideas were conducive then, science today somehow inherently needs or depends on Christianity.
Peyer's uses that great analogy.
The training wheels analogy, yes. It's like saying because kids need training wheels to learn to ride a bike, all bikes forever need training wheels. It just doesn't follow. Science has long since moved beyond any specific religious cradle it might have had.
And Peyer's emphasizes the vast amount of science done outside that narrow Christian context Lennox focuses on.
Crucially, he lists Greek rationalism, Euclid, Archimedes, Indian mathematics, 0 decimals, the Islamic Golden Age, algebra, optics, medicine with figures like Alhazen, Avicenna, Al-Khwarizmi, Chinese natural philosophy, seismographs, geology, all systematic, rigorous, often empirical inquiry happening across the globe for centuries.
So to ignore all that
is to weaponize definition for theological gain, as Peyer's puts it. He argues it's not really a debate about Newton. It's an attempt to gatekeep the idea of rationality itself, trying to claim it primarily for one religious tradition by manipulating the definition of science.
Wow. That's a strong critique. So after deconstructing these narrow definitions, what does Peyer's propose instead? A better definition.
He does. He offers a more expansive one. Science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable, or at least intellectually rigorous, explanations and predictions about the universe.
Okay, break that down. What makes it better?
Well, systematic enterprise covers the methodical aspect. Builds and organizes knowledge is broad. Testable includes the empirical aspect, but the crucial addition is, or at least intellectually rigorous.
So that brings in things like theoretical physics. Or maybe even parts of philosophy or history that rely on logical coherence and evidence, even if not direct experiment.
Exactly. It accommodates historical sciences, probabilistic sciences, theoretical constructs like string theory, interdisciplinary work. It values methodological rigor, even without immediate falsifiability in every single case.
It moves beyond that Newtonian gatekeeping.
Precisely. It embraces the complexity and diversity of how we actually gain knowledge about the universe. It's an opening up, not a closing down.
Okay, so let's try and bring these two perspectives together as we wrap up. We started with Ariano showing how psychology acts as a bridge, using science to explore and even validate things from the realm of spirituality and ancient wisdom.
Right, showing a potential synergy, a meeting ground.
But then Peirce comes in and says, hold on, the very definition of science that Ariano initially used might be too narrow anyway. Science is broader, more historically diverse, and shouldn't be constrained by just one model, especially not one used for potentially ideological gatekeeping.
It creates this really interesting tension, doesn't it? How do we define science? How does that definition affect what we consider valid knowledge, especially in fields like psychology that explore subjective experience, or even in theoretical physics exploring the untestable?
Yeah, the way we define science has huge consequences. Peirce argues that trying to freeze the definition, to lock it into one specific historical moment or method, shows a kind of fear of complexity.
He sees science not as a fixed set of rules, but as a living, evolving methodology, a process, with inherently fuzzy boundaries that are always expanding.
So what does all this mean for you, listening? Well, it's really an invitation, isn't it? To think more critically about information, to question the definitions you encounter.
Especially definitions that seem designed to exclude things, and maybe to appreciate the sheer richness and diversity of human knowledge, how it comes from so many different approaches, cultures, and times.
And it leaves us with a final thought. If science is this living, evolving thing with fuzzy boundaries, as Peirce suggests, well, what new phenomena, what new ways of knowing might emerge in the future that our current scientific tools just can't handle yet?
That's a big question. And maybe the even bigger one is, how open are we, individually and as a society, to continually expanding our understanding of what counts as valid, insightful knowledge? How willing are we to redraw those boundaries as we learn more?
Something to definitely mull over. It's been a fascinating dive into the very nature of science itself.
Hey there, you arrived to the end of this episode. You can always check out my YouTube channel and also keep watching because there are 7 episodes. So you just, if you enjoyed this one, hopefully you are going to enjoy the next one. I always like to remember that you can support my work by buying my books. Even though I still don't have a book about religion, which is the main topic of the podcast, I do have a book about artificial intelligence. And also I have a blog called Scientists Free From Religion on Medium. And there are several blog posts there. And you can enjoy it, you can read it. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can share it with your friends. So hopefully I can hear from you and hope you had an amazing time. So hope to see you in the next episode.